Free agency is pretty much behind us outside of Aaron Rodgers, and today we're going to be tier ranking these teams ahead of the NFL draft. So a lot of things can change from now to the start of the season, but as of right now, where do these teams stand? But as of right now, here is the rebuilding tier going into next season. A lot of these teams have needs. They're going to figure them out and they're going to fill those needs in the NFL draft. Guys like teams like Tennessee and New York need quarterbacks. Do the Browns need one? Absolutely. But we're probably going to ruin another young quarterback's career if we decide to go with one. And the Jets here, they need a quarterback as well. Now they do have Justin Fields, but again, we've talked about it last week. Interesting contract. It's a front-loaded contract where basically, if they want to get rid of him after this year, they can. So that opens up the door for them to, let's say, draft a Shedeur Sanders at number 7. Amir, these are teams that are they have young pieces. They have good pieces on their teams, but next year's just not the year where they're going to win, let's say, 7, 8, 9, 10 games and make a playoff push.
Yeah, honestly, I think Tennessee is trending in the right direction.
Yes.
Despite them having the number one pick, despite all the nonsense that happened this past year with the offense and Will Levis and everything, the defense honestly showed some promising flashes. I mean, the
Yeah.
defense, had times where they were really stout. I mean, the offense had some nice pieces this past year with Tony Pollard, Westbrook, Ridley and stuff like that. And the offense looked explosive at times and they were clicking, man. Watching them both games against the Texans, actual legit team. I
Yeah.
mean, the offense looked absolutely amazing. Defense showed out, forced turnovers. And so, Tennessee is turning in the right direction. I just hope that they don't get a guy like Cam Ward and they go ahead and just throw him out there right away and put a lot of pressure on him because, I mean, realistically, that offensive line needs a lot of work, and this team is still, some big pieces away.
Yeah, they overpaid Dan Moore, and I think a lot of us know
Yeah.
that. A guy that was terrible according to PFF last year, but also just to the eye test for the Pittsburgh Steelers, gets $20+ million a year to try and protect Cam Ward or Will Levis. I will say that I think Will Levis starts the year next year.
Yeah.
But I mean, hey, you have Brian Callahan, offensive mind, offensive coach, comes over from Cincinnati, and his job might be, up. This might be his last year. I'll put it that way. If Tennessee only wins 3 to 4 games this upcoming year, so he needs a quarterback, and he inherited Will Levis. Hasn't worked. Let's at least go out there and die on the hill of a quarterback that we picked. And again, that's why I think it'll be Cam Ward at number 1. But these teams, again, not the year next year for them to compete for a playoff spot. But crazier things have happened. This is the tier of they're okay / the New Orleans Saints tier. Just think of the Saints every single year. That's pretty much what they will.
Yeah.
They might have 3 to 4 really good weeks where they make us believe in them, but then injuries pile up or just bad decisions or poor play on the field, and then they kind of come back down to reality. These are teams that can win anywhere from 6 to 10 games. They might be able to make a playoff push, but overall, these are teams that I just think it's a year where they need to get back on track. For example, the Jags, they made the playoffs a couple years ago. It's been rocky since. You got a new coach. Let's get back on track. The Raiders, new coach, new system here with Pete Carroll and Chip Kelly. You want to get back to the excellent days of the black and silver. Miami, Tua has had a lot of injuries. Last year, of course, they piled up. He missed some time. They weren't able to make a playoff push. You guys get the picture here as we go down the list. Dallas is another one of those teams. The only team that's kind of an outlier here, Amir, is the Panthers. I only had them on here because I think they will be a 7-ish win football team next year with the improved offense. I just think they need to really improve that defensive side of the football. Amir, your thoughts on these teams? Of course, a lot of these teams could make a playoff push. I just don't think next year's exactly the year as of right now.
Yeah, man, what's crazy about the Jaguars and the Cowboys is like, both those teams have some major questions, but at the end of the day, they both have, in my opinion, two borderline top 10 quarterbacks. So,
Yeah,
that's really all you need to sort of move up a tier. But the Jags, I mean, this team is horrible. I mean, you look at the offensive line; they've been terrible. Trevor Lawrence's entire career. He's always had some questionable weapons and firepower in his offense. Defensively, they were horrendous this past year. The run defense is bad, pass defense is bad. All on top of Trevor Lawrence dealing with a whole bunch of injuries, and so the reason why Jacksonville is in the they're okay tier is because of Trevor Lawrence, in my opinion. And they got to really figure out what are they going to do to cater to their franchise guy, man. And me personally, I'm surprised T-Law even signed that max contract. I would have just sat there and been like, man, listen, like I'm gonna give you guys, 1 year, maybe 2 years.
Put some pressure on them.
Right. And for for Dallas as well, Jerry Jones, I mean, pay your players, man. Like this is crazy. Like you have, Dak Prescott, who just had a MVP caliber season last season. You
Two
got
years ago.
CeeDee Lamb, a arguable top five receiver. Michael Parsons, a top five edge rusher. And so, pay your players, go out and grab guys in free agency and make sure this team doesn't go to waste.
Yeah. 2 years ago, just to make sure we're clarifying there. Dak Prescott 2 years ago, MVP level season, led the league in passing yards, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, I'm looking at this board. All of these teams have at least a top 16 pick in the first round of the NFL draft. And looking at it very quickly, Jags are at 5, the Raiders are at 6. You have the Dolphins at 13. The Panthers are at number 8, if I'm not mistaken. So right there, the Saints at 9. So you got 4 or 5 of these teams that are in the top 10. So a lot of these teams can get that one piece to push them over the top because it's a loaded draft class as far as positional needs outside of the quarterback position. These are the teams that are wild card hopefuls. And this is the reason why, for example, I believe in the Colts, I believe in the Patriots and the Chargers more so than the Jaguars. That's why the Jaguars were just a step behind. I think I would put money on these 3 teams from the AFC. I would put money on them more. It's more so than the Jacksonville Jaguars with a first-year head coach. Regardless, these are teams that I think have a lot of intriguing pieces on the roster, whether young or old, and these are teams that can make a push for the promised land next season. So these are going to be teams that are 9 to 11 win teams, might make the playoffs, might miss it. They're right on that fringe is a good way to put it. Amir, your thoughts on these teams? We have young teams like the Patriots, the Seattle Seahawks to a degree. They're on the defensive side of the ball. The Atlanta Falcons with a really first-year starter in Michael Penix, and the Bears. On the flip side, you got veteran teams like the Colts, like the Tampa Bay Bucks, and the offensive side of the Seattle Seahawks. Your thoughts on these teams, Amir? Again, right on the fringe.
Yeah, man, there's 2 teams I'm excited to watch. It's the Patriots and the Bears. I mean, the second Ben Johnson got in Chicago, I'm on Twitter looking at freaking Underdog NFL. I'm getting notifications about the Bears signing this O-lineman, this O-lineman, this O-lineman. Man, this Bears team, if they can sort of build off of what they did defensively last year, because, it was like a stretch where they were like a bottom 5 defense in the league. If they can figure that out, I believe Ben Johnson's going to turn this team all the way around. He went ahead and addressed the problem right away. It's the offensive line. The receiving core is there. Caleb's talent is there. And so they're on. I mean, Chicago should be a borderline playoff team, in my opinion. And the Patriots are also going to be really interesting to watch. They lack, firepower offensively, but the defense is there. I mean, they went ahead and loaded up that defense. The offensive line, can be better, but it's not the worst thing in the world. And so, also with Mike Vrabel, too, I mean, you got a legit experienced coach, a guy who spent the year basically, in Cleveland, in the shadows. And so him, he's probably going to be hungry, ready to go ahead and turn this franchise around. I'm excited to see it.
Yeah, I mean, he turned around Tennessee seemingly overnight.
Yeah.
He can do it here in New England, and he, unlike Tennessee, he's got a potential franchise quarterback, in his arsenal, and Drake May, a guy that I think is still the second best quarterback in the class. We'll see how it turns out here a couple years down the line. But I mean, outside of that, Chicago, you brought in Drew Dalman, Joe Thuney, Jonah Jackson. You have the 10th overall pick to potentially add a Will Campbell or someone of that nature. You can turn around this offense seemingly overnight there at Soldier Field. The only thing they need to fix that field, man. So many injuries happen on Soldier Field. I want to ask you about this, Amir. There's rumors right now going around that Stephon Diggs is talking to Seattle. So we already know they've added a guy like Cooper Kupp this offseason after losing Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, who Lockett might also come back to Seattle. So you're looking at an offense next year, Amir, with Sam Darnold, okay? You have the 2 talented backs in Walker and Charbonnet. You have the 18th overall pick, if I'm not mistaken. It's in that range. To add a tight end, let's say a Colston Loveland, for example. If you were to add a Stephon Diggs, do you think that's like a top 5 to 7 offense with all the weapons they would have? JSN, Diggs, Cooper Kupp. I don't know who's guarding them with that route running ability. Amir, your thoughts on that offense if Diggs were to end up in Seattle, which is where he's favored to right now?
The thing is, I mean, I've said this the past 2 years. I mean, I thought they were a top five little offense the past 2 years with DK, Lockett, when he was playing better, and a couple years younger, with JSN, before he really blew up on the scene, and Kenneth Walker, and the problem is, they need a legit quarterback to sort of catapult this offense even more. And, for Sam Darnold, is like, I just think, it's really risky,
That's why I
for a
have
guy
him
that
in
just,
wild. Yeah.
right, and so I think it's really risky for a guy that just broke out on the scene, had his first breakout year, and you're sort of just going to flush everything they did before, in his career. And for me, I believe, Seattle's kind of in a weird spot where it was like when he had there was no other guys that were truly available. And Gino was kind of the best case scenario. And also kind of now, too, Darnold was probably the best case scenario that they
Yeah.
honestly could have gotten. But I mean, this Seattle offense has had talent. I mean, the defense had the talent, but the defense didn't really step up till later in the season. I think this year it'll sort of change. I think it'll probably be stretches throughout the year where Seattle actually looks like a legit playoff team. And a higher seed, a wild card. But for me, I'm still not fully moved yet.
Yeah, that defense is uber talented there in
Yeah.
Seattle. But can Sam Darnold elevate the ceiling? That's the biggest question for Seattle going into next season. Outside of that, the Chargers, they're coming back. They might add a weapon in the draft. Tampa Bay, they need some edge help. They need some defensive help, to be
Yeah.
honest with you. They've lost some pieces recently, and so much so that I would say that Atlanta's probably the favorite to win that division at this point in time. But let's look at teams that I think will, I don't want to say guarantee because a lot of injuries can happen in trades and this, that, and the other. For example, the Niners, we thought were locks in the playoffs last year. Then they had injury after injury after injury, and they were a 5-win football team. So these are teams that I do project will make the playoffs next year, whether if they win their division or not. The Packers at the top. They got a top 10 quarterback and a very good head coach. They just need to address that defense a little bit and figure out what's going on with Jair Alexander. Outside of that, I like Green Bay for pretty much every year, the next 5 to 10 years, as long as I got Jordan Love and company. Washington shocked the world last year, going from worst to almost first in the NFC, period. And they made a deep run. They've only gotten better this offseason outside of losing Jonathan Allen. They have a bright future with also plus still like what 50 million in cap space. Minnesota, I know you look at this roster and you say they're a Super Bowl contender. To me, it's the quarterback, man.
Yeah.
I would have them in this tier if they had Aaron Rodgers, to clarify. It's the fact that it's still a first year quarterback getting his first real reps at the NFL level, which as of right now, I'm referencing JJ McCarthy to be the projected starter from day one for this team next year. It's still the reason why they're really just a team I think will make the playoffs, maybe not win a game, is because they have a first year starter. That's all I'm getting at there. And for San Francisco, you have the coach. You have maybe the best coach in the league outside of Andy Reid. You have a very talented roster despite losing a lot of veterans this offseason. And it seems to be this, this ever-going cycle with San Fran over the last decade where they're Super Bowl contenders, then they suck. Then they're Super Bowl contenders, and that cycle has continued. So if history repeats itself, Amir, they're going to be very good, and they're going to be competing for the division yet again in 2025. Your thoughts on these four teams? Am I underrating any of these four?
No, not at all, man. The average fan might look at Minnesota and say, this is a Super Bowl roster ready. But, you brought up a great point. It's the quarterback every single time. And, unless you're Kyle Shanahan, or Sean McVay when he had Jared Goff in 2018. I mean, really, there's no other coach in the league that's shown to take a lower level quarterback or a young quarterback, to Super Bowl heights. And,
Yeah.
we honestly just haven't seen that. It's rare. And, for San Fran, too. I remember in 2021, San Fran, they were completely overlooked. I think they snuck into the playoffs like 10-7. They went ahead and were literally one play away from beating the Rams and being in the Super Bowl, with a depleted roster full of injuries and having Jimmy G. And so for this year, I think it might be the same. You go ahead and bring back Salah, defensively.
Yes.
We all know he's a great defensive-minded coach. Offensively, you got Christian McCaffrey coming back. You got Guerrero. You got Kittle. You still got Ayuk coming back as well. And so, the team is still talented there. The coaching staff is still
Don't
there.
forget their best offensive player. Don't forget him.
Brock Purdy.
No. Come on. Let
Brock
me
Purdy, come on now.
Don't forget they got Ricky Pearsall. He's the best white player in the league.
Hey, and listen, Pearsall was really, really shocking and impressive, at the end of the season last year. And that gives them a lot of hope coming into this season as well. And so San Fran really, they aren't too far off. And to talk about the Commanders too, I'm worried about that. The Commanders were sort of, not build off the hype, coming into this season because they still have some major questions on defense. And despite the offensive line, playing great, mostly because of schematically and because of Jaden Daniels. Man, listen, if I'm them, I'm gonna be scared to running back with this offensive line because the offensive line before he got there was terrible. And really, I mean, the offensive line still didn't have much talent despite how good they played. And so if I'm them, I'm making sure we do not mess up this opportunity to build off of this.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, with Washington, if I made money on this channel and I was able to make a living, I would make T-shirts and I would sell this because I say this seemingly at least once a month. It's one thing to have expectations; it's another thing to live up to them. We saw Houston. Some people had them at winning the Super Bowl going into last year, or if not, competing with the Chiefs in the biggest AFC title game, or again the biggest game in the AFC side of things. But hey, they weren't they didn't blow us out the water. They were really just kind of okay for
Yeah.
13, 14 weeks in the season, and they barely kind of won the division, or at least it kind of felt that way. They didn't dominate the way that we thought they would on paper. Washington, they're going to have the talent going into next year, but can they live up to that, or can they exceed those expectations? If they can, Jaden Daniels looks like he's going to be a superstar for years. But those are the NFC. Here's the AFC. Now, again, I didn't have the logo for Cincinnati. Editing error on my part, as that's a glaring part here. Forgive me, right? It's a logo. But for these teams, we have three AFC North teams: the Ravens, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, and of course, we have Houston and Denver, which is a bit of a shocking pick there, but I'll explain. For the AFC North teams, look, Cincinnati, they're bringing their guys back. It seems as of now, they're going to work it out with Trey Hendrickson, and he's going to play next year. They have pick 17. They can grab a Mike Green or, one of these talented edges in the class. And all of a sudden, that front seven, at least, is decent to get after these quarterbacks in this division. So Cincinnati, they have the offense to compete with anybody. And to me, a top three quarterback in the league. I like their chances to make the playoffs and to win at least a game next year. And that's what this tier is all about. I should have explained that. These are teams that I think will make the playoffs for one, but also they have a chance to make it to their conference title game. That's what this tier is about. Pittsburgh, who's their quarterback? As of right now, it looks like it's going to be Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers. If it's Rodgers, I think their ceiling's a little bit higher than Russell Wilson. But again, Russell Wilson knows the scheme, and they have some added pieces into the mix. So Pittsburgh, with their defense, they're going to be elite, but can their offense give them enough? Baltimore, we know they were a couple plays away from making the AFC title game last year. They bring in D-Hop. They can bring in another weapon or also some offensive linemen in the draft. So Baltimore's still going to be in the mix. Let's not overlook them, despite them getting so close every single year. Houston, they have some injury concerns, right? They just traded away some blindside offensive linemen like Tunsil and Kenyon Green, and they haven't really replaced them in free agency. So in the draft, that's their biggest concern for Houston. But outside of that, Tank Dell is going to miss probably 10 weeks going into next year. Stephon Diggs might not even come back to Houston. So this offense, all of a sudden, is CJ Stroud, Joe Mixon, who's a year older, and only Nico Collins and Xavier Hutchinson. So the offense doesn't look great, but I want to see how they do in the draft. And then here's the shocker, Amir. I'm going to roll with, I think, one of the better coaches in the league. I'm going to go with Sean Payton and the Denver Broncos to make the playoffs. And I'll say this, I think they win a game in the playoffs next year as of right now. They have a very talented roster. They have a great head coach, a smart quarterback. This just reminds me of the young New Orleans Saints, right? They have a pick at pick 20 or so, I think 20 or 21. With that pick, they can go with an Omarion Hampton. They can go with a Colston Loveland. They can go with a Ted McMillan, which I'm seeing a lot of people saying that he could fall that far in the draft. If they can add another weapon to this offense with this talented defense, again, they have a lot of young players only getting better. They have the reigning defensive player of the year on their team. I like their chances to make the playoffs and to win a game next year for, what was it, 2026? Amir, your thoughts on these five teams? Did a lot of talking there. What did you take away from it?
The biggest thing is, Cincinnati. When I look at this list, Cincy has the most loaded offense. I mean, the most talented, offense on paper. And we kind of look at last season. I mean, Joe Burrow had a historic season, and this team literally wasted it. And so, for Cincy, pay your players. Pay Trey, go out in the draft and focus on defense. Focus defensively. I mean, we saw in 2021 they had a lackluster offensive line, bad protection, and they still went all the way. And the biggest reason why is because the defense elevated to honestly great heights in the playoffs, and we've seen that. And for Pittsburgh, on the other hand, Pittsburgh is a team where it's like, I would honestly rather freaking rebuild one year, start from the bottom and work my way up to consistently go 9-8, 10-7, and just be mid. And I think it's going to be the same, thing this year coming up. It's like, I mean, it's every year you're kind of looking, stuck with these average quarterbacks, and you go out and you get Arthur Smith as your offensive coordinator. This team still does not move me much. I mean, if it's Russ or if it's Rodgers, get ready to throw tight end screens at Darnell Washington every single play. Get ready and run the ball 100 times. So
I think this played into it. It was kind of like I kind of had it in my brain that if Rodgers ended up in Minnesota, that they were going to make a run, right? They were going to be able to make it to, let's say, the conference title game just to fulfill this prophecy of following in Brett Favre's footsteps. But to me, I think you throw Pittsburgh, let's say they're the 5 seed yet again. I think if they're on the road versus Houston, you got Aaron Rodgers, maybe a top 5 defense in the league with an improved offense with DK Metcalf, with Aaron Rodgers being on his retirement tour. I think that's kind of playing a part into it. I kind of want to see Rodgers make one more run at the big dance. So that's kind of why I think they at least win one game next year or have a pretty good argument to do that. But I'll kick it back to you here to touch on Houston and the shocker maybe of today's video, the Denver Broncos.
Yeah, man, Houston still does not move me. I mean, you go ahead and you trade away basically your whole entire offensive line and make them somehow worse than they already were. And I just don't understand, what Houston is doing. Offensively, you definitely lose Diggs. Nico Collins is obviously, legit still.
Yeah.
But Tank Dell's going to be out, pretty much the whole entire season. Actually, the entire season, if I'm not mistaken. And so now it's like, I mean, you're basically going to have to bank on the fact that, DeMeco Ryans could pretty much, have this defense as a top 3 defense because,
Yes.
I mean, they're going to have to lean on them heavy because this past season, the reason why they ended up, beating the Chargers and making it competitive against KC was because they leaned on their defense. And so that's going to be the biggest key for them. And for Denver, on the other hand, Denver had a great year. And Denver's in a great spot because, they had lackluster talent around them, but they still sort of, exceeded expectations. The only thing I would say for them is, obviously the pressure's on them big time.
Yeah.
But I mean, really, with their roster makeup, how great they are defensively and offensively, I mean, it's going to be so easy for them to kind of, plug and play guys wherever and really just boost this roster up. And you brought up a great point. Like if a guy like Ted McMillan could somehow slip, that would be great. If they could, possibly, sign a slot guy, make a big time push for Diggs and just play him in the slot or something like that. And honestly,
Amari Cooper's
right.
still out there.
Right. You know what I mean? Amari Cooper as well. And honestly, Cooper Kupp would have been a perfect fit, for this roster. Mm-hmm. And, if I'm Denver as well, possibly, either trade for a running back, pick up a something running back in the draft too, because there's a lot of running back talent as well.
Yes. Yeah. I think this. I don't want to fall into a trap, and we'll talk about this in a moment. Denver might be this year's Jets for me. And now last year I was overzealous on the Jets, and I had them going to the Super Bowl. Denver, I don't have them going that far, but I do think that they could be that team where we look back 5 years from after next year and be like, how did they make the AFC title game, right? But it's just a team that like you mentioned, they have a plug-and-play system, have a veteran head coach, and they can put anybody in this offense, and they can just go. They just need their quarterback to be smart, and Bo Nix, if he showed anything in year number 1, he's smart with the football. So that's where I'll leave that. But let's get into it, man. The top 5 teams in the league, 4 of these are consensus. 1, I'm throwing out there because I like the coach that damn much. The Super Bowl 60 contenders, Chiefs, they're not going anywhere. We know this. They have a great roster. They just need to address the offensive line. I feel like they haven't had a great O-line since Mahomes has taken over. They need to get to that point. Buffalo, they have the reigning MVP. They were right there last year. They're seemingly always right there, just like Baltimore and Cincinnati outside of last year. Philadelphia, reigning champs. They're only going to get better in the draft. And they are maybe the best developmental team in the league. So whether if they draft a bust or whoever, I'm sure they're going to come out decent or playing at levels that, they probably shouldn't be playing at. Detroit, they have the offense. Can they get healthy on defense for 1? And how are they going to bounce back from losing 2 of, if not the best 2, coordinators in the NFL on their respective sides of the football? That's a big question for Detroit, so I can have them on the brink. Maybe not being a contender next year because losing coordinators like that are that great, it can transform a team from season to season. And then here might be a shocker, but I have the LA Rams. I would have loved if they were to find a way to keep Cooper Kupp and have Kupp, Adams, and Puka Nacua with Kyron going into next year. But I still think having Devontae Adams, who's better at this point in his career, obviously, than Cooper Kupp, so you have an upgraded offense just based on that alone. If you can fix this offensive line, this defense has so many young players where you got, again, the talented front seven, you got guys on the outside, and then let's not forget, of course, you still got Cam Kinchens on the back end as a safety, one of my favorite players in last year's class, standout rookie season. If you can grab a corner in this draft, I've seen some people like Daniel Jeremiah, who's well respected in the draft side of the world. He's saying that Will Johnson might fall this far in the first round because of his injury history. If Will Johnson finds a way to end up in LA, I mean, wrap it up, right? Will Johnson to LA, I'm saying they're a contender. So to me, if they can just cut the corner, if they can sure end this team, offensively, defensively, I think they got a shot to make a run next year. They might be the biggest threat to the Eagles, who they put up a fight against in this year's playoffs in the NFC side of things. Amir, your thoughts on the Rams being in the mix with these heavy hitters that are pretty much consensus?
Yeah, I'm going to be honest, man. I think the Rams are going to be in the Super Bowl next year, and
Yeah.
for me, I think the Lions, window is closed. I said this before. Losing both coordinators is too tough, and for the Rams, man, I mean, what an offseason they had. I mean, they went ahead, brought in Devontae Adams, obviously. They went ahead and brought back Witherspoon in the back end, and just to look at this team too was like. This like it was the second year in a row, and I keep saying this. It was the second year in a row where we look at begin another season. They're riddled with injuries, and they start off bad, and next they're rolling, and they're the hottest team of football, and they're true contenders. And so going into this season, I'm expecting that to change. I'm expecting them to finally have a healthy season. With all their guys in the lineup, and have this young defense come back for year two. I mean, Jared Verse had a great year. Braden Fisk had a great year. And so I'm expecting this team to not only be able to lean on their defense, but the offense is about to be so explosive. I mean, shoot, Tutu Atwell as well is a great number 3 option.
Yeah.
And people don't talk about him. Kyron Williams, a top 10 running back, arguably top 5 running back. And so, this team, in my opinion, I think they're going to come out the NFC.
Yeah, that's a hot take. We'll have to come back to that if that is true. But again, I think they are the biggest threat to Philadelphia at this point in time. But who knows? Maybe Dan Campbell just says F it, and this team just comes into it with a prove it mentality, and maybe Detroit's just still the team to beat in the NFC if they can stay healthy. But that's really it, Amir. Super Bowl 60. I mean, do you have any thoughts about Philadelphia, Kansas City, Buffalo? I mean, I think we all kind of know that they're complete rosters. They're going to add some talent in the draft and be right back in the mix next year.
Yeah, man, Philly, definitely is not going anywhere. I mean, the biggest thing is like, whenever you win that championship, you're under a bunch of pressure, obviously. But like the one thing, the one thing I want to talk about is obviously like Detroit, man, like Detroit. And, shout out Dan Campbell, shout out the front office for trying to hire in staff and show guys respect that's been there and coaching there. But it's like, when you have a roster makeup like this, one of the most talented rosters we've seen, in recent history, and you go into a season, with 2 first-year coordinators on both sides of the ball. I mean, that's extremely risky, man. Yeah. It's like, you should be doing everything you possibly can to make sure that you get guys that are already proven, guys that have proven themselves in the league and take advantage of an opportunity like this. And, for Philly, Philly, they have just that. The Rams, they have just that. Buffalo, they have just that. Kansas City, they have just that. All 5 of these teams all have, great roster makeups and contender-ready rosters. But Detroit's the only roster that has 2 first-year coordinators on both sides of the ball. Yeah. And honestly, that's what's holding me back from really, having them as true contenders. And for Buffalo, same thing for Buffalo, man. Every single year they have the roster makeup. Well, I mean, really, honestly, this past year, before the season, we thought Buffalo was going to be, cooked. But obviously, they've shown, you have Josh Allen, a future Hall of Fame quarterback. You have Sean McDermott, who's a great head coach. And so, Buffalo's still going to be right there. But, man, like losing like that after getting that much momentum, it's going to be hard to really, come back from that mentally. But I hope they do.
Yeah, again, I agree. Now, again, these teams below them, like Baltimore, can make a run. Obviously, they're still in the mix. The defensive coordinator for them, Zachary Orr, is going to be going into year number 2. Maybe that defense gets a lot better because they can add some talent on the back end there. Outside of that, I don't think Cincinnati has the defense to contend with these guys. So again, AFC is probably still just a two-horse race. That is it, though, man. I'm excited. I mean, I'll say this also. It's a shame that Detroit is not on the top of the mountain anymore. I'm a big Monty guy, and it doesn't look like he's ever going to get that ring now, unless he ends up in Kansas City, right? But that's not going to happen. Episode 263 NFL tier rankings, post free agency, pre draft, and pre Aaron Rodgers decision. That might shake some things up a little bit. And again, if Pittsburgh doesn't get Aaron Rodgers, they're moving down a ranking in a tier just to be sure. But it's March Madness Day, so if you guys haven't filled out your brackets, go make sure and you do that. Amir, any last thoughts as March Madness is in about an hour and a half?
No last thoughts, man. Sit back, call off work, and watch some college basketball.
We'll be back next week with something, right? It'll be fun.